How are you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Today, we are going to be discussing policy and procedure. What's the difference between policy and or procedure? It's going to be a very good dialogue because I have a feeling that most people, even though they're connected, there is a difference. And we're going to explain that. And the dialogue is going to hit up on a couple of things. How our policy and procedures are developed, where discretion lies within a policy and procedure, and then more importantly, when to update or make changes if needed. My guest today is going to be James Ferreira, Butch, retired deputy commissioner out of Massachusetts. But before we introduce him, I would like to go to our sponsors. We first have American Military University. If you guys are looking for higher education, seeking that degree, please check out American Military University. It's a great school, very supportive of what we do in corrections, very supportive of what we do here on Tier Talk as well. And we also have Guardian RFID, from inmate tracking and cell checks to cloud-based business and artificial intelligence. Guardian RFID digitally transforms jails, prisons, and juvenile detention facilities of every size. Visit guardianrfid.com for more information. If guys get a chance, please check out their YouTube channel as well. They also have content that we put up there as well. And don't forget, guys, Inmate Manipulation Decoded is out on the market. The link to that is in the description. And my book is due out soon. Lessons learned. Woo, hello. Lessons learned while working in a prison. My journey from officer to administration. I've sent it out to a few people to get a rough read. And guys, they're considering this book a manual, which is pretty cool, I think. And again, Sandy, who's been working many hours in trying to get this book, really finalized. I want to thank you. I appreciate what you've been doing. And then, guys, I will probably release a workbook connected to this shortly after this book gets released, just so we can make sure that we get the best of what this book has to offer. So, again, very excited for that. And this book should be out shortly. I mean, very shortly. Just, again, finalizing it, make sure that, everything is, I guess, literally all T's are crossed and I's are dotted. I mean, that's pretty much what we're looking for. And again, the book is about taking your correctional career to the next level. So I really am excited for this. So we got Butch. What's up, Butch?
Good afternoon, Anthony. How are you?
Good, brother. Hey, Butch, you mind introducing yourself again to our audience?
No, I don't. Butch Ferreira, former assistant deputy commissioner for the Massachusetts Department of Correction. 35 years, 9 months in the profession, and started as a correction officer and maneuvered my way up through the rank structure until retirement.
Hey, Butch, before we go into this topic and before we dive deep, do you think that this topic is relevant?
Very much so. I think that this is really the entry into the understanding of the big picture, which I think is very important. So policy and procedure will probably cover everything, that we do in corrections. There's not much that we do in corrections that's not governed by either policy and procedure or procedure alone, standard operating type procedures. But I think there'll be a policy that governs just about every discipline, whether it's medical, classification and programs, custody, food service. I mean, everything we do, there's a template or a policy that governs that operation, where there's certain standards or benchmarks that we need to meet in order to be successful. So yeah, I think it's very relevant.
Yeah, and guys, the reason why I think this topic is important, guys, is because part of this discussion today is going to discuss discretion. And I want people to know something, that policy and procedures there, obviously to give us a guidance. But when you start moving up, you have to start making decisions when procedures fail. When procedures don't meet what policy is requiring based on certain situational factors that could arise. So I think that's a very important part of what we're going to be discussing today, because the scariest thing here sometimes in corrections is having utilized discretion, because guys, we deal with situations every day that they're unique, rare, and to have to make a decision in the moment, you're going to realize something. You're going to go look for that policy and procedure, and policy says, well, you got to get to here, but the procedure is saying, ooh, we don't know how to do that. from this perspective. So I think that's where it matters. Like policy is the intent. This is what we want in the perfect ideal world. And that procedure is developed through that bias. This is, if things work out perfectly well, this is the procedure that can get you there. But again, as a supervisor, you're paid to make decisions when policy, we get what you want, but we're not under the ideal conditions. So how do we work with the procedure to get to what policy is expecting? And I think that's going to be the fun part of this dialogue. But I do want to give us a little understanding of how policies and procedures are developed. Now, Butch, he was all the way at the high-level executive staff. So we're talking about deputy commissioner. So he was definitely involved in policies and procedures, the development of policies and the procedures to carry out. And I thought, Butch, what we could discuss basically is the higher-level policies, of course, but then don't forget, we do get these higher-level policies where it's like, this is what we want, and then it's filtered down to the facilities into how it's supposed to be carried out, which to me has always been the best route. Tell us what you want, and then we'll figure out how to carry out within our means and resources. And by the way, me, even as a management of the house, I still like to do that. Okay, this is what central office wants. Let's push it down and see how we can get this developed. So go to my people on the floor, the tactical people, the one that are going to have to be carried out, and find out where the how is. And that's where you develop the procedure that can match the policy. But can you tell us a little bit about how policy and procedures are developed?
So those are all very good points. So typically in an agency such as corrections, you'll have either a director or a commissioner. Anyone who's the chief executive officer over that entire agency is the person who is had the power invested in them to establish policy. So all of the policies are established by the CEO, and then they're disseminated throughout the agency, whether, all different types of the disciplines, whether it be a minimum, a pre-release, or a medium security, or a maximum security prison. The policies are pretty generic as far as, we shouldn't say generic, but it's a coverall. And they apply to all agency disciplines and all facilities and all special units. So once the policy is developed, and policy becomes developed based on a couple of things. I'm sure in many other agencies, like similar to ours, Anthony, statutorily we're required to develop some regulations governing important functions such as use of force or classification or inmate visits or some of the food service or public health standards are required by statute for the commissioner to actually develop a policy. And then, other policies developed based on need, new initiatives, perhaps some of our previous successes, good things that have happened in the agency or the department where we want to now make it policy and have the entire agency follow it. And then as well as probably and most definitely due to some of our failures in the profession, we would establish policy that would help prohibit or prevent some of those failures from occurring again. Now, that would be policy. It would come out with policy statements, for example, when we're allowed to use deadly force, a policy that governs restricted housing units, establishes the conditions of confinement, meals, showers, exercise, mail, visits, telephones, access to all that stuff.
Hey, Butch, would you say that? So just real quick, and I definitely want you to get the thought out too, just so bear with. I want to make sure we get some clarity here.
Yeah.
Do you think that obviously there are some higher level policies that have universal function regardless of what facility it applies to? The procedure may be somewhat the same. Like we were talking before when I was driving here, maybe paperwork that would be consistent.
So my train of thought is that I think that even the ones that I described, for example, I guess restricted housing and that use of force and that stuff wouldn't really apply to minimum security facilities or pre-releases. So, but there are some that will be, for example, classification, and how classification is done, meaning the nuts and bolts, the paperwork, the documentation, all of that, I think sometimes can be outlined in policy. And that's when policy and procedure is sometimes one and the same, because the commissioner or the director will reserve the right to standardize some of the hows to get to the goal of the policy, for sure. And classification's one of them. I think medical, a lot of the decisions related to medical sometimes, or a lot of the procedures related to medical sometimes are standardized, that the facilities have to do it all the same and document it on the same type of forms. And
even just standard operational reports, the need
Sure.
to write them could be based very standard.
Sure. And even in larger, even more complex policies, are more detailed in custody, for example. Like I brought up some examples with tool control. Like in many agencies, tools are shadowed. That's how they're stored. And
shadow board.
Yeah, and they're mandated. So years ago, I think you would see, before central office became much more involved in the institutions, you would see a policy statement that would say the superintendent or the warden will establish, procedures to control your tools. Now, in agencies in this day and age, you'll see a lot more detail. Not only will wardens and superintendents have to develop procedures that govern tool control, but it will include A, B, C, and D, which include shadow boards and marking of the tools and issuing procedures. So they reserve their right to standardize, and there's good and bad that comes with that. But certainly there is a need for the procedures to be specific to the site.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think that's where, I think that's kind of where the nuts and bolts are. You are going to get what policy intends. This is what we want to get across. And I believe there could be some standardized methods. Like, again, we mentioned before, paperwork that must be handed out, or for classification, maybe how they do their objective scoring, just to kind of keep things consistent with, things that, fair practices, because again, if we can't be too far off from what the other facilities are doing that work with the same agency. You know what I mean?
For example, there's some good examples. Point-based classification is one of them. You can't have somebody given a certain score for the type of crime in one facility, and then the score be different for, you know what I mean? So yeah, there is a lot of, and same thing, with some other policies and procedures. There has to be standard, and how you document it. For example, I know even today with technology, they'll mandate what programs can or must be used. You can't have people going off with a wildcat program, tracking certain things when the agency has established this is our sole tracking process for a certain program, let's say.
Yeah, and I think that, back way before I got into corrections, there was a lot of autonomy by each facility. Pretty much the warden ran the show, but I think that also led to some inconsistencies. So at that point here, it's like, we need to centralize certain concerns. And I believe that's why we've gotten to this point we're at now. Do I think it's a lot? You don't want any agency ran by memos and policies. It makes things very complicated. We wind up generalizing failures and applying it to facilities that may not even had those failures. And all that does is demotivate staff from stepping up and taking initiative. But having said that, because that's kind of where we're at lately, having said that, the key here is that for most policies and procedures in their development, what you would like to see is the what from however, this came about, whatever the what's got to be, but then you would like to see the how pushed down to the lowest level. And I think that's the way it should be. So again, even if it passes to the facility, then the facility can have a meeting and then discuss, hey, this is being set from central office, but they're leaving us with how we need to carry it out based on the specifics of the facility, which crosses into the procedure. Now, the procedure is different from policy because the procedure is what leads you to the end game, to what policy intends. So
That's
can you
correct.
explain the difference between them both?
So again, policy outlines the goal, the overall accomplishment, uh, what the end result will be. Um, and then the procedure will dictate how, should dictate how each individual institution or operation will reach that goal. And I'll give you an example, and I've used this in the past. We talked about a few, but restricted housing unit, for example, the policy under the conditions of confinement section will talk about how much time inmates will spend outside their cell and what activities they'll be doing and how often. For example, showers. If they shower, if the policy requires that they get 5 showers per week, the institution will look at that and hopefully determine how do we get all of our inmates showered 5 times per week. Some facilities may do certain floors at different levels on 7 to 3 shift, and 3 to 11 may do the others, even and odd. There's a dozen different ways in which they'll manage to get it done, but the procedures will dictate and be specific to that site on how many showers need to be given on a daily basis and how they rotate them to get everyone done. Obviously, they need to be specific to the site because the restricted housing unit sizes are different, the number of showers available, so on and so forth, the physical plant challenges that each facility may have. So the procedures will be associated with each policy. For example, let's give it a policy 100. And then hopefully, the procedure will probably be, procedure 100 that it associates with. So the policy comes from central office, and that's the plan. And how we get to the plan or how we complete the plan is in the procedures.
Yeah, and what's great about this, guys, if you guys listen to this is actually good because sometimes you may have a departmental policy that has to become operational because it doesn't just involve the one department. It's going to push into other departments. So sometimes, let's say social services has to develop a program. So that's great. They may have their departmental policy that relates to how that program is to be facilitated, but then there may be an operational policy related to how to get the inmates to that program. And that's where you start to see maybe the generalized idea from above, like, okay, guys, we got to get these 4 programs implemented into the facility. So it'll be pushed down departmentally that social services, let's say, has to facilitate these 4 programs. Then the institution will get a hold of it and say, okay, so we're going to develop this policy, but now we got to get to the procedural side of it all. How are we going to get these 4 facilities, these 4 programs out there? What unit are they going to be in? What time are they going to be let out? Who's going to be able to go to these programs to some extent? I mean, sometimes that could be a departmental issue, or sometimes that could be based on the needs of the facility. But again, I think sometimes, because you mentioned it before, I think sometimes when you have departmental policies that are coming down in isolation, but really does involve the operations of the house, then you're going to see a transition from, the main idea, the standardized idea, but then it's going to get filtered through the needs of the house. Because again, that to me is what helps the policy, get facilitated or for the policy to be carried out. So, again, you're going to find, sad to say, in corrections right now, some of the policies are developed in an isolated fashion, and then it's pushed down to administration or operations to figure out how are we going to help this department succeed at what it is that they want to do. And most of the time, to be honest with you, we're going to have to go to custody because custody is going to have to help us figure out how to carry it out. So again, I think the isolated visions, because if you work in corrections, you'll notice that there's directors for all different areas, from rehabilitation to education to medical, whatever it is. So they may write their policies based on some level of what's best for their department. So it may come out isolated, but the one thing they cannot write is how that's going to be implemented operationally. And what I mean by that is when all departments have to work together to help that one department be the prime mover. Would you agree with that, Butch?
So ideal conditions are when time permits for central office to send out policy in a draft format and get it down to the facilities who can then, with a time limit on review this, review and advise how, when, what, where, can you implement it, how will you implement it, comments, so on and so forth. And then it's put together, you put together the comments and it goes back up to someone in central office that represents the commissioner's office. And they weed through all of that stuff and see if there's any changes that need to be made. There needs to be some discussion whether that's a mandate, wherever the policy statement came from. So those are the best conditions where you have the time allotted to you, where you can send it out to all the facilities and get comments on what their thoughts are on the policy and what their procedures may look like to get there. When we did that, when that happens in an agency such as corrections, you'll get the responses back, this can't be done, or, it's going to cost this much amount of money, or we're going to need to do some physical plant changes. So those are the best conditions when you get the, a commission is going to have to fund it and that type of stuff. What impact does it have on the budget? What impact does it have on labor management? Those are the best conditions. I know I'm talking from my level, but
no, but it's still good. It's still good to elevate.
I think it's valuable. Yeah,
it's still good to elevate because you said something that I don't want to walk over, but you said something that's pretty unique. Like, so basically, there are going to be variables: the status, the layout, in some cases, staffing. I do believe that when they try to standardize, they try to look at what is manageable from all facilities because they have the same amount of resources in that area. But when they realize, okay, there are going to be slight differences because this is a max facility and this is a minimum facility, then maybe at the max facility we'll run the program twice. At the minimum facility, we could run it 4 times or 6 times. I mean, again, that's part of the like you said, the variables that have to come into play. But you said something that I don't want to overlook is that it is brought down to the institutional level and they should be able to voice their concerns. But I want to mention this. You cannot be an obstacle. You have to be a resource. That means that we're not looking to say no. We're actually looking to say yes. So this way, if we go with the right mindset, trying to look to say yes, if there is a no, then the no is on the back end of an exhausted effort. To me, if you make no effort to come up with a solution of something that has to be carried out, then you are part of the problem. I'm sorry, but at this point, and I know, guys, sometimes people don't want to hear it. But changes are occurring, things are happening. So we need everybody's 100% involvement, but we need their honest involvement, not going to the table and coming up with 20 million reasons why it can't be done. Because then me as a manager is going to turn around and say, well, you know what, Butch? You gave me 20 million reasons why it can't be done. Then you got to give me 20 million solutions right now because you're getting paid to give me solutions to keep things running. But, again, it's the way corrections is headed. But the key of this point is to bring it down, like Butch said, to the administration who's going to bring up the tactical side. So central office brings it down to the administrative side, and then administration brings up the tactical side, and we sit down to discuss it. And, guys, when we sit at this table, there is no rank. There is no position because we want honest feedback here. Can this happen? Can it not happen? And how do we move forward? Would you agree with that, Butch? Or sorry, but that was
under ideal conditions. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. We need input, and we need good input. One of our biggest. You need to make sure that you don't surround yourself with a bunch of yes men or yes people. We need honest input because we need the policy to work. Because, like I said, a lot of these policy directives and changes that come, are statutorily required. Criminal justice reform was law in Massachusetts. The commissioner is not going to be held in contempt or be sued, or the taxpayer, have be punished because, a warden says it can't be done because they get defensive and, we're playing, different sides. I come from an agency where, the wardens could and sometimes would say it can't be done, but that would be my cue to drive down to that facility and talk that out
Right.
before I took that message to the commissioner or to my boss. But
Now, let me ask. I want to ask you a question, Butch, because this is what matters. If there are certain people that, if they said it couldn't be done, obviously you could put your eyes on the site in an effort to try to assist, but you knew that they made an honest attempt. And then there are some that just are resistant from the get-go. It is what it is. No, we can't do it. It's like, hey guys, you haven't even made the effort. And then when you go there and you realize, like, have you guys even tried this out? Like something simplistic, and they tell you no. Doesn't that become frustrating? Because it's like, you're supposed to give me honest feedback.
It only happens. It only happens once, I think, and sometimes I think it happens with new wardens that may not come sometimes from the custody side, because again, I think you hit it on the head. No matter what policy comes down from central office or from legislators or from anywhere, it always involves custody, because we control the tempo of the facility by the nature of our function. So it only usually happens once, and then it's usually with newer wardens, I guess I should say, and sometimes it depends, what category the policy's in. I can remember, struggling with of course, I was already a deputy commissioner at the time, but Matt was extremely medically assisted treatment was extremely difficult for the institution, not just for custody. So, it only happens. Usually only happens once, and then I remember, cases where we were evolving rather quickly with custody stuff when Larry Dubois was our commissioner, and we had a lot of wardens that had, a lot of salty wardens with a lot of experience, and they tested the waters where they couldn't be done, and he just put his foot down, but we all learned from that too, where there are ways to make it happen, and not to be so. You use the word sometimes.
The cut corners.
Defensive for your areas. You know what I mean? You've got to keep an open mind and understand the intent of the policy and why we're doing it.
Yeah, like I want people to know we're not telling people to cut corners. If there's an honest effort and it can't be done, then it can't be done. We get it, and then that could always be justified. And
we have a process for that, Anthony. It's called we had a waiver process, right, where if there was a specific portion of a policy that couldn't be implemented at a facility, the warden would have standardized form where he would fill out with exactly why and because he or she couldn't, what are you going to do to mitigate that process of, and the commissioner was the only one that could grant the waiver. Now, I will tell you, as a assistant deputy commissioner, or even the director of the policy unit, that was a hard battle. That was a hard fight.
No, it is. I'm not saying it's easy, but I do want to mention one thing, though. If you have a strong secretary or commissioner and you really have a legit reason why something can't be carried out, it's funny because generalized, you get a lot of people that want to push how they feel prison and jail's operations should be, very general. But then when you go back and justify a specific reason as to why something can't be carried out, and you forward it up and your commissioner, your secretary supports it, you're going to get nothing because they don't know. Like people are quick to generalize what we should do. But then when you kick back something specifically saying why you can't, and it's supported at your highest level, then the people that are trying to push it, they don't have an argument. When they were trying to get rid of restorative housing altogether, and it's like, yeah, we got to get rid of it, and they try to use the primitive solitary, and it's like, well, you know what? We don't have solitary, so give us an alternative of what you're trying to get. So what do? They just change the wording. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not solitary. We're in restorative. They didn't change nothing. They just basically just changed the verbiage. Now, this is the key part of our discussion right now. And guys, if you're supervisors, I'll even go as far as saying if you're the front line as well. And I want to read something to you that I quoted from John Maxwell today that's actually going to be in my book. I added it today, and this is very important. As you move up, you can't be afraid to make decisions. And most of the time, what happens here is people lean on policy and procedures. So, I mean, they do give us how we got to operate. Don't get me wrong, but sometimes they can make us vulnerable. They could make us very predictable, or sometimes the procedure just doesn't have it right to get to where we need to be. And that's where we have to make decisions and be able to stand by those decisions. And that doesn't just occur when you're already at the highest position. That occurs pretty much from the get-go, right? When you enter this profession, even though at the very beginning you're going to be pushing policies and procedures, but eventually you're going to learn to develop discretion and how you got to run things, and then realize that quickly that not everything has to be paper and pen. You can manage things through communication and honest effort. So he said this, and this is going to be the foundation for our next part. He goes, as one moves, well, I said this part at the beginning. As one moves up in their career, they need to practice decision-making often. John Maxwell, leadership expert, states, good leadership is learned in the trenches. Becoming a good leader is a lifelong learning process. If you don't try out your leadership skills and decision-making process when the stakes are small and the risks are low, you're likely to get into trouble at higher levels when the cost of mistakes is high, the impact is far-reaching, and exposure is greater. Mistakes on a small scale can easily be overcome. Mistakes made when you're at the top cost the agency greatly and damages the leader's credibility. So discretion is centered within the procedure developed by policy. Now, this is the main conflict of our dialogue, because this is where I think most get policy confused with procedure. So I'll give you an example, Butch. Let me just generalize this example real quick. Let's talk about visits, right? So let's say there's a specific memo or policy that states what the inmate visitors are allowed to wear, just in general, right? Which could be discretionary depending on the facility, but there could be some standardized things they cannot wear. Now, again, let's say someone that's new, never visited a facility before, is wearing something that they shouldn't be wearing. Now, again, there could be alternatives. We could give them a white shirt or whatever the case may be, but let's just say they're wearing something they shouldn't be wearing. Some people may be quick to tell them. Now, this is important, guys. I want you to think of this and really listen to what I'm saying. Some people may see what they're wearing and say, no, you can't come in today, and make the no absolute. There's no working around that no. Now, let's say I get called down. On the back of my mind, I know the policy is I got to get this visit off. I don't want to violate any safety and security. Don't get me wrong, but I want to make an exhausted effort. So when I go down there and I see that there could be alternatives to get this visit off, and the person goes, no, they violated policy by wearing this. It's like, no, they may have violated procedure, but the policy is still to get the visit off. So don't mix up the intent of policy with the procedural concern, because if we tend to do that, then all day we're going to say no, 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 when as a supervisor, I should, as long as within my parameters, have some level of discretion and within that procedure, as long as it doesn't violate safety and security. So again, the person may say, no, they can't wear that, and that's what policy says. No. The intent of policy is what? To get the visit off. I get it. The procedure here says they really shouldn't wear that. But again, the violation of policy really leans to the fact that, what do I want to do? I want to get this visit off. So I want to exhaust all measures to get that off. So you could say, well, let me ask you a question. Did you offer them a white shirt? Did you offer them a non-contact visit? Did you do whatever you could to try to exhaust all measures to see if we can make this visit happen? Now, most people are going to sit there and say, well, Gangi, policy says this, procedure is this. Yeah, but as a supervisor, you're being paid to utilize discretion. What's the sense of me having you there if you're going to say no all the time? I'm not telling you to jeopardize the facility, because there are going to be some people that are going to generalize it out and say, Gangi, you're telling people to break policy. And I'm not. I'm saying, as a supervisor, as you increase, your level of responsibility does get greater, but it also increases in your areas of discretion. Hey, if this person can't make I'll give you an example. Before you tell someone no, based on, let's say policy wants this visit to happen, and let's say there is the person's not wearing the right shirt, whatever it is, or the right whatever it is, shirt, whatever it is. So what do they do is the officer may say no, but having said that, they're also told call a supervisor, because if the supervisor could go over there, take a look at what's happening and then be able to have a course of action that's justified either way. Either way, if I have to say no, I'll be able to solidify that no. And if I have to say yes, these are the alternatives. And I want to mention one last thing, guys, and it's in the book. As you move up and you become responsible for the people that are responsible for the inmate, the yeses become harder because you want to say yes to keep things moving. No stops it. No stops everything in its tracks. And you feel that as you start to move up. It's like, man, if I say no, it affects this department and we stop moving. So what's the alternative to keep things moving? What's the alternative? So I think sometimes when people jump to say no, they look at the procedure and say, well, the procedure says you got to do it this way. Okay, I get it. But the policy still states to try our best to get this done. So when you say no, now it could be a point where we really have to justify it, because the violation could be in not moving these things forward. What's your thoughts on that, Butch? Because there's a lot there.
So you came around. I was on the other side of the fence there for a second, but you came around, Anthony.
Wait, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, so what you described probably happens in every jail, prison, and detention facility in this country on a daily basis. Someone comes to visit someone else who's never been there before and has no idea that there's a dress code, and normally shows up in clothing or presents himself that is in direct violation of the policy, or, like you say, the procedure. And then it starts. I drove 2 hours. I haven't seen this person in so long, and so on and so forth. I think experienced agencies got tired of all this, and I know that your idea of this is a little bit different than mine. I think, I don't want to use the word disagree, but we have a little bit different take on this. I think the agency standardized what the dress code was so that there was no confusion when inmates moved from different facility to facility. There was no, well, I could wear it at this facility, now I can't wear it at that facility. So what they did is they standardized the dress code for visits. Now, having said that, there are opportunities for folks. I think, we used to help encourage, hey, there's a Walmart down the street. Denim blue jeans are not authorized. Employees can't wear them, nor can visits wear them, because the inmates wear them. So it's a risk to security. It's hard for people to understand that. But if you run down to Walmart or down to the strip mall down the street, there's plenty of opportunities for you to pick up something that meets the policy requirement. Can you come back, use the restroom and change, and then we can get you into visit. We can make arrangements that, they're not going to lose any time in the visit and stuff like that. So there's stuff that you can do to mitigate the no's.
So would it be? So how would you answer this question then? Because okay. I think we're on the same page. We are. Mm-hmm. How would you answer this question? Would you equate a violation of procedure as the same as a violation of policy?
I don't. I think there's probably circumstances in which you can violate procedure but still get the outcome that the policy is requiring.
Now, is that where supervisory discretion must be employed within their parameters?
I think that you could say that on certain examples, yes. Within the parameters, they did things to mitigate, and they still met the intent of the policy, but not to be confused with shortcutting.
Right.
And being complacent.
Right.
So there's a difference between the two.
Yeah.
It's a great discussion.
Yeah, because I think we're on the same page. I've used visits as an example because, mind you, I never said that they can go in with wearing that stuff.
No, you didn't.
I just said
no, you didn't.
Yeah.
Now, again, and I want the supervisors out front to make all of to check off all the mitigating things. Can they change? Do they have anything in the car? More importantly, have they been here before? Who are they visiting? Now we have technology. We know that they've visited 50 times and they know the dress code, but they came up, so there's all kinds of that different stuff that goes on out front with visits. And I want my supervisors to get all of that stuff done and to document it in a report. And I want the denial of the visit to make sure it happens at the right level. I don't want the CO in the Sally Port saying, no, you can't come in. I want the CO in the Sally Port say, ma'am or sir, can you step out of the Sally Port? I need to talk to my supervisor. And then the decision gets made.
Well, usually, right. So usually when there's any conflict, the supervisor gets brought in and hopefully they have that level of responsibility to make that decision. Now, here's the funny thing. I posted up on my Facebook page, and I also posted up as a YouTube poll. Would you equate a violation of procedure the same as a violation of policy? So the first person writes 2 words for the same thing. So yes, and we disagree with that. And then the other person who's medical states, sometimes you got to wing it in medical. In my experience, where security was limited, sometimes you got to improvise. So, I mean, I at this point here, I know it's sad to say, I kind of agree with medical on this one. Well,
you brought up a great example, and we do it every day. For example, when someone's going out on I hate to put this over the airwaves, but when someone's, really been diagnosed and is unconscious, and they're going out in an ambulance, do you think we strip search that individual going out? Huh?
Can't comment on that, sir.
Right. But do we do things to mitigate it? Yes, we do. Do we put a wand? Do we get the person through the scanner? There's technology now that supplements some of that stuff, but I mean, let's be realistic about this. The medical person, I'm sure that's the type of stuff that they're talking about. How about doing CPR when the inmate's handcuffed?
Yeah.
How many times has that been challenged by mortality reviews and other things? Yet, the correction, how many officers have been punched in the face by inmates who, it's a gesture and they're not really under any type of serious medical distress?
Well, that's when you have those conflicting policies that, to be honest with you, is it may come down isolated, but that's where that middle road is discretionary. It's like when the 2 policies meet, can I work with the other department and make sure that when priorities shift, we all are able to do what needs to be done. So at this point here, medical has priority, but now the inmate becomes a threat. Now it's custody. So it's really a matter of when you have those departmental policies that conflict, the shifting priority. Because at this point here, believe it or not, guys, and I believe this is how correction should run, is that at no time should priorities be in conflict. We should know when to step back and give the other department the lead and vice versa. And I call that the prime mover. It's in my book. When you have shifting priorities, the question is, who's the prime mover at this moment in time? And guys, I'm going to be honest with you. Even though some people may think that's subjective, we really have to figure out our role and work with those other departments, because most of the time it's not subjective. We may feel that it is, but it may not be. And having said that, now you have conflict between 2 policies because the 2 people that are in charge can't make a decision as to who's got the lead. And that matters, guys. Hey, anything else before we get to that last part? Anything else about discretion within policy and procedure? Because I have one more part I want to cover.
I just want to make sure, I just want to backtrack just a little bit. I want to make sure too that I wanted to get this out to make sure that, we hear you out there. We feel you in the profession, especially the practitioners now that, are having statute rammed down their throat with no input from the correctional practitioners and the expert. The unbalanced change is frustrating, and it's coming down in policy format. I just want to say that we understand that, and how difficult it is on this day and age, and what a bad practice that is. But let's move on. I just want to make sure we get that out on the policy discussion that we were having.
Yeah. By the way, that's always the foundation of what we discuss. I
Yeah.
agree. It's just in our efforts to also keep the truck moving. I mean,
Yeah,
I
you got
wish
to
we
do
had
it.
more. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I agree. I wish we had more say. But at this point, since we don't, the only thing I can do is push for our involvement in it. Okay, so the last part of this discussion, which I think is interesting, is policy and procedure should be reviewed as needed or within an annual review to see if any updates or changes are needed. Now, this to me is the lifeblood of any facility. I mean, policies and procedures are built on successes and failures, but they're not meant to remain there forever. Here's the cool thing about it all, guys. If it comes to me kind of summing it up a little bit, is the policy is the principle and the procedure is more of the process. So we have to know what those higher level principles are and then do our best to stay loyal to those principles. But the procedures may evolve and the procedures may change. But anytime the changing of a procedure affects a principle, a core value of what it is that we do, 100% we have to go back and say, what the hell are we doing here? And that's kind of what Butch was talking about. Like, if I feel that they want to implement a policy and procedure that breaks away from, let's say, safety and security, because that is the fundamental basic core value of any prison or jail is safety and security. And then that's the principle of every policy somewhere along the line, even though it may not be spelled out, every policy is fueled by safety and security. It's a prison, it's a jail, it's going to be the principle. So at any time when you have procedures and you're looking to evolve, you have to ask yourself if anything that we're doing right now affects the facility's ability to carry this out in a safe and secured method. So I think when it comes to annual reviews and still allowing the effort to evolve, we can't break away from our principle, our core values, which we all should know what that is. That's the core values at the highest level that should filter down to every policy that we need to implement. And then again, if the procedures have to change, we get it. That's part of evolution. That's part of, the facility adapting and adjusting. But in those efforts to make the change, have we broken away from the core value of what it is we're looking for, safety and security being paramount? What's your thoughts on that, Butch?
Yeah, it can be rare when the core values evolve or change to where we may eliminate, a certain section of a policy or a mandate. I guess I shouldn't say rare, but it's less frequent than what some folks would think because the policies are so strong over time. It's difficult for those type of things to change. But yeah, I think 12 months. Every policy should be reviewed, sent out for review, sent out to all the wardens. Okay, here's your opportunity. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Get some comments in there. Put this policy should change and this is how, or, it's operationally sound at this time. But more importantly, I think it's important to understand that just because it's an annual review process, and I think that's the national standard, I think that changes to policy need to occur when they need to occur. Changes need to take place when changes need to take place, and don't wait for that annual review to make the changes. It's important to get those changes out when necessary. I thought that if you had a strong audit process or a strong internal review process of your operations, you can monitor if policy is workable or meets the intent of what we're trying to do, or you can see some policy or procedure that needs to be changed based on the dysfunction of the program. Could be right. It could be a medication line sometimes where I was like, there's got to be a better way, and we would sit down with the medical folks and we would come up with a different process. That was just for an example. But yeah, no, there needs to be a review process because things are constantly changing. Physical plants are changing, national health codes and food service operations. And there's all kinds of things that change on the outside, the walls of corrections that impact us on the inside, and things need to change for us to get up to speed.
Yeah, I think this dialogue centered on a paradox, actually. When you come to think about it, control versus empowerment. Policies do enable some level of control, right? But then we as management have to find a way to balance that by empowering staff so we have a system that they're invested in, a system that they feel they can have an influence on, could be innovative. So we keep the growth going. So again, there is a good balance between making sure policies are handed out and we follow certain things, but to also make sure that staff feel empowered, that they can make decisions. Because again, if we're so policy driven, then we'll never wind up with decision makers as they move up. Pretty much, I believe the best ran facilities, there are always going to be some level of control from above, at least with establishing parameters of where staff can make decisions. But it should never be an effort to disenfranchise them from making a decision, to taking the initiative. And by the way, guys, that is intentional because to be honest with you, systems always want to go back to what's easier, which is usually complacency, shortcuts, negligence, I have to say. So there has to be some oversight to make sure that when you kickstart something positive, which usually momentum, that you keep that momentum going. Because I'm going to tell you something, guys, like a train. If you have a train moving at constant momentum, it could break through a brick wall. But the same train that's not moving will take forever to get over a nickel. A little bit of a metaphor, but I think you guys get the purpose. Is the fact that if we as management keep the momentum going, there's no obstacle we cannot defeat. But that momentum can only occur if staff feel empowered to do so. And again, within the parameters of those prescribed roles. So that's where the paradox is. The paradox is balancing control with empowerment. And again, that's something that the management literally has to make sure that when they filter stuff through, I think the best way to do that is what do we want to get done? And then push it down tactically to see how they want to get it done. Hey, but do you have anything you'd like to say in closing?
I do. I think it's very important to make sure you made the good point about, practicing making decisions at the lower level so that you're proficient at making decisions at a higher level, before you get there, or at least you have the potential. I think that's very important. And I think the most powerful piece of, making decisions and staying within the parameters is understanding what the policies say in the particular discipline in which you're a professional at. And if you get a bigger perspective of the big picture, and as you become, responsible for, let's say, running the institution on the weekend as a shift commander, you better have a wide, knowledge base of medical and food service and those type of things that are important to the day-to-day operations, so that when you know the policy and procedure, you're going to make better decisions when an incident that takes place or a situation that arises that's not covered by policy and procedure. And that's going to happen. You need to understand that policy and procedure could not possibly cover every situation that could arise in a prison. But if you get out of more trouble and more arguments or more disagreements and be able to get some consensus or make more than one person happy, if you know the rules and the intent of the policy and the parameters of that you're responsible for enforcing. And you made a good point, Anthony, about things can start. We go back to like complacency and we fall back sometimes, and that's why I'm a big stickler and for the basics. Never straying from the basics, and monitoring the basics on a constant cycle. And that way there, you can also identify if the procedures are effective. We've had many procedures that were probably ineffective that needed to be changed or tweaked to make it more effective. But again, a very good discussion. I think knowing the policy and procedure, knowing the why we do some of these things as well is very powerful. When I first started to understand that, not only if we didn't, 3 meals a day, the showers, the exercise, we're actually violating the law in Massachusetts. It's administrative law. It's a regulation. It's more than a policy. That was a big eye opener for me in my first year in corrections. and then I started looking deeper into the law and the different regulations and stuff just to be educated. But you'd be surprised how many folks just think, they don't know where it came from or why we do things. But it's very important to have a good understanding of those policies and procedures that impact your day-to-day operation.
Yeah, I want people to know something as I give my closing thought, guys. I asked the question: is policy different than procedure? That was the beginning of discussion. Now, by the way, the poll's starting to shift. 75% do see it as two separate entities, and there is that 25% right now that's seeing it as the same. But I want to make sure people understand something, and this does relate to the why. If I have an issue between two departments and I'm management, and I bring both departments or whatever, let's say just two departments, make it simple. Let's say medical and custody. So I bring both departments to the table and I ask what are the concerns. Now, really, I would love for these department heads to solve it, but sometimes they get so stuck on their wants that they eliminate the needs of the facility, which could be what both departments are trying to get to, but they're seeing it in a very isolated perspective. So one of the things we ask, I think that's a good question to ask, and that most parties will agree with, is what are we trying to accomplish and why are we trying to accomplish it? That's a great question to ask, because you'll find out what Butch said. Somewhere in the why, these two departments are connecting. They're connecting. The conflict comes from how it's being carried out. Because I'll say, maybe let's say custody has an issue with what medical's doing, but medical's doing it because this inmate needs medical attention. Custody's not going to argue not to get, they're not going to say, well, you can't give inmates medical attention. No, they know the inmate needs medical attention. So what happens is, somewhere when you ask the why, sometimes you'll see that the departments do want the same outcome. The problem is they have two different routes to get there. And that's where the procedure becomes a conflict. Now, us in administration or people that are decision makers, so I guess, we're all decision makers, but at the highest level of responsibility, if we saw every decision against procedure as a violation against policy, we would never move forward. We would never move forward, guys. We'd be stagnant. We would never move forward, because at the end of the day, I get it, but a procedure for this department could be a conflict with a procedure for this department. So we always have to ask ourselves, and what Butch said in a few shows ago is, what's the intent of policy and why can't we get there? And then that's where the obstacle is. The obstacle isn't the road that each department wants to take. It's the road that we have to, how do we get them together? That's the concern. That's the concern. The concern is, I know you want to go this way, I know you want to go this way, but in the end, how do we merge the road? So again, if we equated a violation of procedure the same as a violation of policy, then you don't need decision makers. You don't. Sorry, guys, you don't. You don't, because a violation of procedure, if justified and needed, does not equate to a violation of policy if the end game is that result, is I had to go this way to get to that. I've always told people this. Certain times situations may occur and you have to work around, but always an effort to bring things back into policy. And what does that mean? What does policy want? And why can't we get there? So I think this was a great discussion. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.